marathon. Oh god. Holy shit. Yay. Oh my god, congrats. What's up everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Emily Jade and I just finished my first World Major Marathon, which was the Chicago Marathon. And overall it was my third marathon where I actually got not only a personal best, but I also broke sub 4, which was my A goal going into this, but I didn't put too much pressure on myself because of the fact that it was a world major and soaking in all the vibes was my #1 goal, first and foremost, before any kind of time related goal. So in this video, I'm going to talk to you about everything you know about Chicago Marathon, how I entered, what it's like planning your trip, and what the weekend was like, including the expo and the course itself. So I hope you stick around and let's get started. So how to enter the Chicago Marathon. Like any other world major marathons, except for Boston and I believe Tokyo, I entered the lottery system, and apparently when I had entered, it was a time where they actually received a record-breaking amount of entries. So I was pretty stoked and lucky that I actually entered the marathon, and I was just like, I'm just gonna do it for shits and giggles. I wasn't really expecting anything because I was also training for 70.3 Ironman, so that was like my #1 race of this year. And then if I got in, I was like, great, I'm just gonna run this for fun kind of thing. And I believe you can also enter this marathon through qualifying times as well as through tour groups, but you would have to pay for the tour group and what other things that they've got planned for that. I don't have too much information on the tour group option, but I know there is a website that talks about all those things if you are interested to join through that. When it comes to the registration costs, it was quite expensive compared to, you know, signing up for a local race. If you're in Vancouver and you're signing up for BMO, I believe the cost is like 100-ish. If I'm not mistaken, whereas the registration fee for Chicago was $255 USD. So you can imagine that's actually quite expensive. And not to mention, traveling and the accommodations also adds up. You know, we live in a capitalist world, so of course the city's going to take advantage of everything that's happening race weekend. So hotel prices were through the roof, especially when I booked. It was earlier this year and already there were prices upwards of $600, $700 a night. It was insane. So because Keen and I had a wedding this year and we had other races and whatnot, we're like, okay, let's just plan a short weekend getaway and not stay any longer, especially because we were planning on going on a honeymoon as well. And then just overall, we wanted to save some money. So if you are traveling internationally, just be aware that flights and accommodations aren't going to be the cheapest. Also too, it depends on the location of where you stay. Obviously, if you're staying in the downtown core of Chicago, it's going to be more expensive, and even more so expensive when you are staying close to the start line and the finish line because they're in the same area. So depending where you stay will dictate the price that you're paying per night. And another tip is booking your restaurant in advance. So if you're looking to go out and eat the night before race day, make sure you plan ahead, book your reservations, because there's so many people traveling to Chicago that a lot of restaurants are going to be booked up. Or, you know, you go out and buy your groceries and prepare your own food for dinner as well as race day breakfast. I also recommend, if you are going to do some grocery shopping, buy your groceries early, because when we went to Target, I kid you not, the bananas were almost all out. That the bananas that I got weren't even super ripe. They were quite green, but you know, it is what it is. And then even the bagels were running out as well. So I got pretty lucky. So just make sure when you are looking to plan your meals that you plan ahead. So unfortunately, I actually booked a reservation like a month in advance for this one restaurant, but it actually closed down and I didn't find out until a week before the race. So I was scrambling to figure out, okay, what other restaurants can I book? Of course, a lot of places were already booked. So the next best thing was to order in. And what I realized is that a lot of restaurants do scheduled pickups. So first thing Saturday morning, I actually scheduled a pickup at Giordano's. It was like just a typical chain restaurant because at that time, that was all I could find. So I decided to put in an order, got some pasta and deep dish so we could test it out. And I was able to pick it up at 5:30. They were running behind and I had a feeling that this was gonna happen. So if you're gonna do order in, make sure you schedule that pickup because if you plan to order something around your pickup time, they might be delayed or they'll even put the pause on ordering online. So I know that one of the bagel shops that we went to for lunch, some people wanted to order online, but they actually paused their online ordering system because it was just so packed and there was a queue outside. So just be prepared that everything is going to be busy. So we landed Friday night, which meant that Saturday was our only chance to go to the Marathon Expo. And it was a little ways away from the start and finish line. From where our hotel was, which was the Canopy at the Hilton, it was about a 15-minute drive. So it wasn't too bad, but if we were to take transit, it was actually going to be like a 40 to 50-minute ride. So we were like, let's just take an Uber because it's a lot quicker. When we Ubered there, it dropped us off at this place called the Traffic Circle. And this is essentially like the main drop off and pickup location if you were taking Uber or Lyft or taxis or what have you. And so if you're looking to go to the expo and want to avoid the crowds, make sure you get there early. Go there either on the Friday or early Saturday morning, which is what we did. We planned to go first thing in the morning so that way it wasn't super hectic. I mean, there were a lot of crowds, but it wasn't as crazy as like say midday. And what I do like about the expo was the fact that it was quite efficient. You enter, you kind of walk through like the hallways and it leads you to this like big convention center. And then first you have to go through security, get your bag checked if you have backpacks. So make sure you pack light. Make sure you come prepared with your identification and your registration QR code because they're going to need to scan and verify your identity. And then what I really like, because I thought there was going to be a long line of people, but even though there were a lot of people, it was so fast. There were so many different booths of where you can pick up your bib. They would scan your QR code and tell you, okay, go to booth 20. That's where you're going to pick up your bib. And so I got my bib packet and then the lady told me, you can go through the expo, go to the very back, and that's where you can pick up your gear check bag and as well as your t-shirt that's in it. So you enter through the expo. It was quite overwhelming. Like there was a lot of people and you can easily spend a lot of money here, but because we were already spending so much money on the flights, the food, accommodations, we were like, you know what, we don't really need to buy a lot of things here. Let's save our money. So I just put my name on like the little, I don't know, statue, Abbott World Major statue, put my name on it, and then we walked around, checked it out, obviously took some pictures, and then went to pick up my shirt. And we were on our way, and of course we explored somewhat in Chicago. Of course I had to check out the Bean, and then after that we got some food, and then we essentially chilled the rest of the day. Because I just came in Friday night, I didn't want to walk too much. I wanted to make sure I was staying fresh and ready for race day. Also, I do want to add, if you are leaving the expo and you plan to take an Uber or Lyft, there is like a rideshare section in the traffic circle, but I highly recommend you walk a couple blocks out and then order your Uber and Lyft. It'll save you a lot more time. I just saw a huge line of people in the rideshare location. I was like, okay, this is just super chaotic. And then there's traffic because it's a traffic circle and everyone's going in and out. So if you want to avoid that, just walk a couple blocks. We walked to like the Marriott Hotel, which wasn't too far. It was like a 5 to 10 minute walk. And then we ordered our Uber and Lyft, came very quickly, and then we went back to our hotel. So morning of the race actually went pretty smooth. I woke up, got all my things ready. I had my usual breakfast with peanut butter and banana, and then of course some coffee to help with the digestion. And I'm so glad I was able to have my pre-race poop, because if you followed me during 70.3 Ironman, I wasn't able to poop and I just had stomach issues the entire time. So after I got all my things ready, we were out the door and we walked for about 20 minutes to get to the start line, which was pretty good. It helped warm up my legs a little bit. By the time we got to the start line area, there's actually gates. Like, again, this is my very first time coming to a huge event like this. So, I said bye to Kian and then I had to go through a gate, and spectators aren't allowed to go through that. So you kind of just have to say your goodbyes, enter through a gate, and then there's a bunch of porta potties, and then you go to your corral depending on, what gate you're supposed to go through. I would say it was a little overwhelming because there's just a lot of people. However, it was a lot bigger, so I had more space. Like, I didn't have to squeeze in compared to 70.3 Ironman. Like, the one in Victoria was very tight. Anyway, I digress. I got to my corral around 7-ish. 7:20, 7:30. This was after I went to the bathroom again. And make sure you get to the start line as early as possible. I got there around just over an hour beforehand, which gave me plenty of time to line up for a porta potty. And luckily, the line that I chose was quite short. So I managed to probably wait around 20 minutes for the porta potty, and then did my business, went to the corral, and then I had about 40 to 35 minutes to kill before I started. While I was waiting, I sat down for a little bit to just give my legs a bit of rest, because, just standing for about an hour, it does get your legs working. So you want to make sure that you're just relaxed and whatnot, and just be ready for the race. By the time it was 7:45, I took my first gel. And then after that, I took off my hoodie, threw it out to the side, and then we actually started walking towards the start line. And then before you know it, we were on our way. So talking about the Chicago Marathon course, it is pretty flat. I would say very similar to what I have been training on here back home, but with the exception of a mini hill just before the finish line. I will say this course is in a city, and so the GPS just gets really wonky, especially if you're going in between big buildings and going through tunnels and going through overpasses. Your GPS starts to be all like, what the hell is going on? And it starts messing with you. Some people's watches will tell them that they're going a lot slower, so they'll pick up the pace. Some other people's watches will say that you're going a lot faster, which was my case. I think the first kilometer, my watch thought that I was running at a 4:05 to 4:20 pace. I'm like, this is not possible, because I definitely don't feel like I'm running at a 4-minute pace. Although sometimes it's hard to tell, because if you are running on adrenaline, especially at the start, you'll feel good, but then you're actually running way too fast. So in order to avoid that mistake, do find a pace group. They'll help you get into a good rhythm. So that's what I did. I looked for a pacer, and then I relied on them for a little bit until I got into a good and consistent rhythm. So what I really loved about this race is the fact that the crowds are amazing. There's obviously a lot of people, so the atmosphere was through the roof. It can get a little overwhelming because there's so many people, but honestly, that just helped me get through the entire race. I was smiling throughout all of it. And because of this, I didn't focus on trying to get a personal best. I was really just soaking in all the vibes, because this was something I've never experienced before. And also too, you don't have to worry about feeling lonely. If you've ever ran the Vancouver Marathon, there's a part called the Seawall, which is the last 10K. And that gets very lonely because there's not a lot of spectators there. And because this is where most of the runners start kind of flopping and start hitting the pain cave, that's where it starts to get really tough on you mentally. Whereas here, because it was just so loud and there was just so many people, I almost felt like I couldn't even hear myself think. And there's so many times I couldn't even hear Kian yell my name. He was yelling for me so hard. And there were a few times I just didn't take that in. Poor Kian, he had to yell so hard. But yeah, it's just honestly so amazing. The only downside of the crowds is it's going to be packed. And if you're like me and you're not used to running with such a huge crowd, be prepared to dodge and weave. Obviously try not to, because this is going to lead to running a lot more than you have to. I ended up running like a kilometer over the marathon distance, which I do not recommend. It also didn't help that I had to, you know, run to and from the aid stations on the side of the streets. So just be aware of that. There is a blue line on the course that you can follow. So if you stick as close as possible to that blue line, you'll be able to know that you're running as close to 42 kilometers as possible. So when it comes to the aid stations, I believe there were 20 of them along the entire course, and they were about a mile and a half or so apart. And so the first aid station was around 1.5 miles, and that's where I saw Kian. And the aid stations is also an area that can get very congested, so just be aware of that. You're going to be doing a lot of dodging and weaving as well in this area. And these aid stations are about a city block long, which contain Gatorade and water. And so one of the tips that a pacer gave me was, don't go to the first person you see, run a little bit until you see like a gap, and then look at them, make eye contact, point at them, and then grab the water. Because once you see an aid station, a lot of people have a tendency to go to the first person that they see, whereas the rest of the other people don't have anyone. So just make sure you go where it's a little bit more empty, which is later down in the aid station area. So don't go to the first person you see, run a little bit, and then grab your water. So that day actually was pretty warm for me, so I made sure to not skip any of the aid stations. I took water as well as Gatorade at all aid stations, and then every other aid station I took my salt tablet along with some water to make sure that I was staying hydrated and making sure I was taking my electrolytes and sodium. And thankfully, my stomach did not hurt at all. So I think being consistent with the water helped with the digestion of all the gels as well as the sodium intake. So for the majority of this race, I actually felt the strongest I've ever felt compared to all the other marathons that I've ran. And now, to be fair, this was my third marathon, so I don't have a lot to compare it to, but compared to the first two, I was like, holy crap, like the difference in my runs compared to my previous races, it was a huge difference, like night and day. So I was like, holy crap, like I feel good. But I made sure to stay conservative, keep a good rhythm, and then, you know, just make sure I'm like looking around, enjoying the atmosphere. And it wasn't until I started to feel something at around 34 kilometers, and that's where it started to go downhill. I started to feel my calves tighten up, and I was like, oh no, it's that feeling again. But I'm like, okay, I just like slow it down a little bit, because I knew if I pushed a little faster, the cramping would come. And then I saw 39 kilometers and I was like, okay, I'm almost there, literally like 3K left, like I can push it. And so I pushed it, and next thing you know, my calf just gave out, and I was actually in the middle of the course that I had to walk or limp to the side of the road and just stretch the cramp. And thankfully there was a guy there who had a cooler of drinks, and he pulled out a can of Coke and was like, do you need this? I'm like, yes, please. So I downed the Coke, kept stretching my calves, and I was like, I texted Kian, I was like, fuck, cramped. And he texted me back and was like, take it in, stretch, pause, like breathe through it. If you need to, start doing run walk. Because literally I only had 3 kilometers left. I was like so close. So I was like, okay, just run walk. And that's what I did. And I was starting to get mad at myself, because I'm like, I'm so near the finish line, but like my legs just can't give out. But again, I tried to talk to myself positively, saying I can do this, you know, run, walk. And then, you know, that's what I did until I had about a mile left. And then that's when Kian saw me. And I was actually on the other side of the street when he saw me, and he saw me walking. So I started to like run diagonally. Again, looking back, I shouldn't have done that, because that added a lot more distance to the race, but it is what it is. I really wanted to see Kian. So he was talking to me, he was giving me the pep talk, which was what I needed. And you know, he was like, it's only a mile left, you can do this. So I was like, okay, I can do this. So I picked it up, I ran, he ran with me for a little bit. I obviously walked a little bit and then I picked it up again. I was like, okay, I'm so close. I saw a sign that said 800 meters left. I'm like, okay, that's just a few more minutes. I can do this. So I ran or tried to run. It was, I think, an easier pace. And then I turned the corner and it was a freaking hill. I was like, oh, and I saw so many people going up it. I'm like, okay, just go up nice and slowly. So I ran up and I tried so hard not to push it because again, I was scared my calf was gonna cramp. So I'm like, okay, just run nice and steady. And by the time I got to the top, I think this was more mental than anything. I just couldn't run anymore. So I was like, hey, just walk, just keep walking. So I'm walking. I see a sign that says 300 meters left. I'm like, okay, I can for sure run this. And thankfully it was kind of like a downhill to the finish line. And I did. I ran. I was so happy. I've never been so relieved that I, one, crossed the finish line, but also two, I was like staring at my watch. I'm like, no way. I got a sub 4. I was like in disbelief and I just couldn't believe I actually broke sub 4 hours. And I was just kind of standing there like, oh my gosh. And then there was a guy beside me, kind of did like, oh my gosh. We made eye contact, we high-fived each other, and it was like one of the greatest moments during that race. So after we crossed the finish line, it was honestly like a long walk to the exit. So, you know, you keep walking, there's like these different stations of where you get your medal, you get like the little warmer blankets, and then after that you get some water. I think there was like a Rice Krispie, banana, some other things, I think. And then after that, I went through the gate and then saw Kian, and then that was it. But yeah, that marathon went by so fast that I was like, oh my gosh, what a quick weekend. And honestly, like despite the crowds, once I finished, I'm like, wow, this race is a little bit overrated because it is so packed. And I was, thinking about the negatives and the fact that I had to dodge and weave and run a lot more than what I needed to. But then I was like, you know what, take yourself out of this mindset. You are lucky to be here. This is a privilege. But despite the little setbacks and the mini obstacles throughout the course, like honestly, it was a vibe. Like the energy was nothing that I've ever experienced before. So it was definitely a fun time. I couldn't have asked for a better day, honestly. I made sure I kept my hydration and nutrition plan dynamic. And because it was a little warmer than I was used to, I made sure to drink a little bit more water, a little bit more Gatorade than what was planned. And I think that worked out really well. Although my fueling and hydration was on point, I think there is definitely a deeper issue that I need to work on, especially on my left side. I do know I have some strength I need to improve on. So this is definitely something I need to continue improving, especially this course because it's so flat. You're literally using the same muscles over and over again. It's just continuous pounding on the pavement compared to if you were going on a hillier course, you're using different muscles to go up the hill and down the hill, whereas this time it was literally just flat. So definitely something I need to work on. So it's more hill training, more strength training to get stronger again. Yeah, so that's the Chicago Marathon. In terms of what's next, obviously it was a huge year. So now it's just some much needed rest and recovery and a lot of downtime for the remainder of this year. But I do have some plans in 2025, so stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed this video and found some of it insightful or helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below. And if you are interested, you can watch the rest of my Chicago Marathon series here. And with that, I'll see you in a later video. Bye!